Hi, I'm Dr. Bertice Berry. A few years ago, on what is the Christian calendar, the season of Lent, I wanted to do something that allowed me to explore myself, my roots, and to explore humanity a little bit more. So for 40 days and 40 nights, I read and or listened to books by people who had been enslaved. These were all people who had made their way to freedom. And while I knew quite a bit about that period of time and had read many biographies of people who had been enslaved, that there was something about those 40 days and 40 nights that took me on a journey that was most painful but most hopeful and promising. Because after two or three of these books and the anger that came with it, I knew that they were going to get to freedom. But what I didn't know, I knew of the horrors of enslavement. I didn't know how systematic and deliberate and intentional and done with consistency, and it was a practice, and it was learned, and there were instruments that you could purchase and buy, and there were different kinds of whippings that you could administer, and there were certain ways, and people actually taught these things and did these things. And it was 40 days and 40 nights of really, are you kidding me? And yet there was always this hope and the promise of freedom. But I did it to look for patterns in these narratives that enabled a person to get to freedom. And in all of them, I found a desire to be free, a strong desire. The average number of times people ran away was 4 to 7. People would run away, get caught, be beaten within an inch of their lives, and do it again. There was a fierce intelligence coupled with education, either a formal education or some kind of divinely inspired education where people would spontaneously learn to read and write. Once they would listen and find their letters, they would learn to read and write, or they would learn the elements, maybe from an elder or someone else. And there was this spark of the divine within all of them. They saw that the light of God lived within them and yearned for their freedom. And then last year, this past Lent season, which was the lentiest Lent that anybody has lented because of coronavirus, I read the narratives of abolitionists, the people who helped others get to freedom. And I'm going to tell you right now, that was a more difficult journey because I could understand why you yearn to be out of this heinous institution, and we should teach it more. We should make it clearer why this was so brutal and what it meant and what it did to people. We should teach that more. I could understand that. I could understand the yearning for freedom away from that. I couldn't understand why people, most of them were people of means. They weren't poor. I couldn't understand why they wanted to go into enslavement to bring someone else out. I couldn't understand that. And then the more I read, the more I saw that it was the same thing. They all had a desire to be free themselves. They had an intellect that was coupled with an education. So this fierce intelligence coupled with education, just like the enslaved person. And they also had this spark of the divine. What they knew, though, and I think the enslaved person also knew, was that until this abolitionist helped someone else on their journey to freedom, their journey would not make it. Many were Society of Friends, who we called back then Quakers. They understood that the spark of divine, this little light of mine, lives in all of us, and your light helps to shine a light on the path that I need to journey. So both had these same things, but it was more difficult for me to see on the part of these people. Many were wealthy. Many had their own businesses, and they were merchants and tradesmen and textile people, and they were willing, and in many cases gave it up. In the case of John Hunn, who owned the plantation that my family lived on during the period of enslavement, he was an abolitionist. And everything was taken away from him because he vowed to give his life and limb to him in this horrible institution. That's a lot to say to you today. All of us have within us the spark of the divine. And all of us must come to the realization that until everybody's free, nobody's free. That my enslavement enslaves you and that your enslavement enslaves me, that your light shines a light on the pathway that I need to become all that I need to be, and my light does the same for you. I love you. I want you to take some time reading at least one of these narratives of the people during the time that was impossible to envision, but they had a hope and a vision for freedom for everyone. I love you.